Released in 2004, the World of Warcraft has left quite the impact in the MMO genre and PC gaming as a whole. When someone says video game, the first thing that most people think of is Mario, Zelda, Donkey Kong, and World of Warcraft. Jokingly referred to as World of Warcrack due to its addicting nature, it took the MMORPG world by storm and reached tens of millions of subscribers. It's been parodied to death, emulated, and due to its success, even a movie was created about the Warcraft universe. Everyone has played it, or at least knows someone who's played it at some point. But the question is why? What secret does this game hold, and how did it capture such a broad audience? In this video, we'll cover its creation and go over all of the major events in the game's near 14-year timeline as of 2018 that made it what it is today. So, it all began in 1999. George Lucas's Star Wars The Episode 1, The Phantom Menace was just released. Pokemon had the entire US population firmly in its grasp. The world was getting ready for the Y2K Armageddon, and more importantly, the game EverQuest was launched. This was a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, or MMORPG for short, and it was the first commercially successful one to use a 3D game engine. It really brought the genre to the forefront and showed just how much potential it had. Straying away from the established linear-style RPG at the time, rather going for more of an open-world sandbox and focusing on that massively multiplayer aspect. Behind the scenes of all of this, the first pulse of the World of Warcraft was recorded. Blizzard's Warcraft franchise was rolling strong at this point, with the first, Warcraft Orcs and Humans, being released in 1994, and following shortly after its sequel, Warcraft 2: The Tides of Darkness, in 1995. These were fun little strategy games, received quite well, with the sequel selling over 2 million copies and even getting an expansion called Beyond the Dark Portal. Enter the world of Azeroth. Humans, elves, orcs, trolls. It's the bread and butter fantasy setting with spells, dragons, and most importantly, a lot of potential. Too much to fit into a simple RTS game, as most of the lore was packed into the manuals that came with the game. But with this, Blizzard had 3 great franchises under their belts: StarCraft, Diablo, and their flagship, Warcraft. Diablo would see a widely acclaimed sequel in year 2000, and StarCraft in 2010, over a decade after the first. And in 2002, Warcraft saw a third installment in the series with Reign of Chaos, and the Frozen Throne expansion pack 1 year later in 2003. Once again, great little RTS games that improved on the previous games in almost every way. But still, too small a vessel for what Blizzard imagined the franchise to be. Lurking in the background, they had something else in mind. During these early 2000s, these MMORPGs were growing in popularity with games like EverQuest, as mentioned earlier, Ultima Online, RuneScape, Star Wars Galaxies, and so on. It was something totally different, a huge virtual sandbox world for you to explore, with people from all over the real world. The goal wasn't to finish a storyline or see a credit screen, it was what you made of it. You built your own story, and with thousands of others, you built your own communities and virtual world. The potential was there, and it was just a matter of time before one game in particular caught fire.
is a vast, unexplored world.
Fast forward to 2001. World of Warcraft was first announced at the European Computer Trade Show. Making its debut with a cinematic, it promised a world of mystery, adventure, and danger. Not just a single-player real-time strategy game with a campaign that you could beat in a day like the previous games in the franchise, but rather, well, a whole world. A full 3D environment, a personalized avatar that you created, multiple continents, zones, races, classes, all of the bells and whistles of the MMORPG genre at the time. It was clear that EverQuest was an inspiration in its design. But a simple clone won't cut it. They had to do something different, so what was their hook? Well, basically, it was that it would be more accessible to the everyday player. At this point, things such as XP or gear loss upon death, or even permanent character death were commonplace in the MMO scene, as well as picking your stats and putting in points during the character creation before you even knew what you were doing. It was pretty hardcore, so the World of Warcraft wanted to give a more laid-back and casual experience that didn't punish the player for dying or require extreme knowledge of RPGs in general to play. In a genre that was growing rapidly in popularity, they tried to appeal to this untapped market, all the while maintaining that, while it'll be easy to learn, it'll still be just as hard as the others to master. As more and more details of the game were unveiled, the initial reaction was actually uneasiness from the fans of the series. The previous games were simple, single-player experiences. You buy a game, you pop it into your system, and you start playing. That's all you need, but MMORPGs broke these rules. You need an active internet connection to even play it, and not only that, in addition to the game, you also needed to pay an extra monthly subscription fee. Today, this is common, but back in 2001, even computers were still pretty new to a lot of us. What if we got a phone call while we were playing? What happens then? You had better hoped that you weren't in combat, that's for sure. I can hear those AOL login sounds now. And as for the subscription fee, is this a game or a magazine? It was much more foreign to the average gamer, and left many unsure of the direction of the series. Regardless, development continued throughout the years as more and more of the finer details of how the game was going to work were released. Via the Computer Gaming World magazine, issue 208, released in November 2001. Initially, there were just 3 races: humans, orcs, and taurens, and you would have vast character customization options, a huge selection of different armor and weapons to obtain. You'll be able to visit old areas in past Warcraft games, and of course new ones as well. Fans oohed and ahed at the preview screenshots, and slowly but surely started to get an idea of the world that Blizzard was creating, and the anticipation of the end product grew and grew. To tide them over, the 3rd installment of the Warcraft franchise was released in July of 2002, as mentioned earlier. The big project, though, was World of Warcraft. At this point, around 50 people were all working together around the clock on the game, adding more and more of their planned features, giving previews, building the world, and trying to create something playable for the eager fans to test. They were stepping into unfamiliar territory for sure, but the passion for what they were creating carried them through it. This development continued until February 2004, when the first beta test launched. Finally, the game was opened up to the general public. 3 years after the initial announcement, and looking at screenshots, reading articles, and watching gameplay trailers, players at last got to enter the World of Warcraft. They were finally able to create their own avatar and start their own adventure. At this point, players found something that more resembled the actual November 2004 release of the game. Many more races were playable, several different classes, a working questing system, and so on. It was an MMO in the Warcraft universe, and after several months of testing, it saw its official release in North America, Australia, and New Zealand on November 23rd, 2004. Just as they had promised, the game offered a far more casual experience with low penalty to dying, easy to jump in, an easier learning curve with the combat, questing, and character building systems. It was the casual player's MMORPG, and at the time, very polished. All in all, it launched with 60 levels of character progression, 2 continents with 41 zones, 2 factions, the Horde and Alliance, with 8 playable races, 9 different character classes, hundreds and hundreds of quests, dozens of dungeons to crawl through, and 2 raids to complete. And to support the eager fanbase, 88 servers. Critics found few negative aspects to bring up, and it received numerous awards upon launch, with many more in the months to come. The world was entirely new, and for a lot of players, so too was the genre. There were refugees from other big MMOs like EverQuest or Star Wars Galaxies, but due to its casual nature, the World of Warcraft was the first MMO for a lot of people. About 250,000 in fact, judging by the archived subscriber numbers, which was very good at the time. Remember, MMOs are still growing in popularity, and unlike the RTS games, which sold millions within the first few months of release, these required an active internet connection and a monthly subscription fee. Combine that with the stellar graphics at the time, and thus a good computer required to run it properly, to reach 250,000 sales and subscriptions through all of these hurdles was impressive to say the least. And, as word spread, this would be just a fraction of the game's peak. Its major competitor was EverQuest, and although their subscription numbers were never public, based off of press sources, they were estimated to have around 400,000-ish around the time World of Warcraft released, and this would decrease in the months to come as Warcraft gained popularity. Whether it was dungeon crawling with a group of 4 friends, facing off against enemy players of the opposing faction, or going through a raid with 39 other members of your guild, players found themselves gripped by the new MMO and found it hard to put it down. It was everything they wanted, and more. Remember that term World of War crack I mentioned earlier. Even reaching the maximum level was very time-consuming, and addiction started becoming a common thing. People got fired from their jobs, or they just flat out quit to play more, and sadly, friendships and even lives were claimed with the most extreme cases. It was almost frightening how addicted people would get. It's a trait with MMORPGs in general, but it said a lot about the quality of World of Warcraft in particular, with how wide it spread. As the subscriber numbers grew and grew, and it was becoming clear that this was the new MMO to play, Blizzard expanded into other regions with releases to South Korea in January of 2005, Europe 1 month later in February, and China in June of the same year. The race was on between regions and guilds to level to the max and to be the first to claim a raid boss kill. And finally, after 2 months, the raid boss Onyxia fell at the hands of the guild Ruined from the US on January 30th, 2005. As the players were progressing through these dungeons and raids, the subscribers grew and grew, and thus too did the investment of time and money into the game. Over time, it saw improvements in every aspect. Warcraft as a series was no longer Blizzard's flagship, it was World of Warcraft itself. More dungeons and raids would be added, the PvP would be improved, and so on to retain the player base. The subscriptions rose, reaching a staggering 1 million in February 2005, just 4 months after the launch, and more than double than EverQuest's projected peak. Just a few months later, in June of the same year, this number had tripled to an astonishing 3 million. The gaming world had World of Warcraft fever. Blizzard projected 1 million subscribers in 1 year, so to triple that in just half a year after launch was astounding. They weren't prepared hardware-wise and struggled to keep up with the growing player base. Server downtime became commonplace as they struggled to keep up. Kind of a good problem to have, but the frustration still arose, as you would imagine, being that it was a monthly subscription-based game. It was during this boom that it started spilling out into the real world. The first viral video showcased a player named Leroy Jenkins haphazardly charging into a dungeon room while his comrades came up with a plan for attack, resulting in their deaths.
It's a lot better than we usually do.
Alright, thumbs up. Let's do this. Leroy!
Oh my god, he just ran in.
Save him! Oh geez, stick it clean!
Oh jeez. Let's go.
The video caught on and was shared all over the place in various gaming forums, news websites, and even created a new term within the genre called Leroying, where a player foolishly charges into the fray with no regard to his own safety or that of his party members. In November of the same year, it became a piece of trivia in the popular game show Jeopardy! Although all 3 contestants didn't know the answer.
That would be the World of Warcraft. All right, we have...
Leroy, you were just stupid as hell.
At least I have chicken.
Interestingly enough, going back to our subscriber chart here, the video released in May, and just 1 month later, the game saw one of its biggest spikes in subscriber numbers. You can't officially confirm any correlation here, but it's funny to think that one video may have actually had such a substantial impact in the popularity and spread of the game. In September of the same year, the World of Warcraft became a subject of study in epidemic and terrorism research when a virtual pandemic broke out within the world of Azeroth. Players could be afflicted with a spell called Corrupted Blood, which would damage them and also spread to nearby party members. This was intended to remain within the confines of a raid instance, but players found out how to bring it into the major cities with dense populations and maliciously spread it to other unknowing players and non-player characters. Within hours, these major hubs became uninhabitable as the disease spread between its dense population, until finally, days later, Blizzard was able to remedy the situation by introducing a patch and restarting every server. This event would later be compared to the swine flu pandemic and is still used today in research in the spread of diseases. The World of Warcraft continued to grow, either through word of mouth or commercial advertisements, and nearly a year later, after the Leroy Jenkins video released, another video related to World of Warcraft went viral in April of 2006.
Odd groups got left, even groups got right. That means 1, 3, 5, 7 left, 2, 4, 6, 8 right.
Titled the Onyxia Wife animation, this didn't show the lighthearted mishaps of an overzealous adventurer, but rather that of a raid leader who was less than impressed at the performance of his comrades in their attempt to kill Onyxia, a raid boss.
Whelps! Left side! Even side! Many whelps! Now handle it! Fuck!
This instead displayed a darker side of the game of how much it gripped people and the consequences of addiction. Months later, in October, more light was shed on the game via the cartoon series South Park with their Warcraft theme, Make Love, Not Warcraft episode. The plot centered around 4 friends who cast away their social lives and health in exchange for becoming more powerful in the game to defeat an unnamed player who continuously kills lower level players for his amusement. This episode was watched by 3.4 million viewers, making it the highest rated mid-season premiere on the Comedy Central network since year 2000, and receiving the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Programs in 2007. Over a decade later, it still ranks upon the series' most popular episodes. With all of this surrounding the World of Warcraft, the game grew, and so too did its subscriber count, and by the end of the lifespan of the base game, 8 million players worldwide found themselves lost in the world of Azeroth. On January 16, 2007, the first expansion set for World of Warcraft launched. Named the Burning Crusade, this expansion focused on culling the invasion of a demon army upon Azeroth, going through a portal into their realm and taking out their commanders, including returning protagonists and antagonists from the Warcraft franchise such as Illidan Stormrage and Kael'thas Sunstrider. It sold nearly 2.4 million copies within 24 hours of launch, making it the fastest selling PC game ever made at that point. The world was built in the base game, so now was the time to start adding more and more story. Every gameplay system was updated and improved, classes were balanced further, new dungeons and raids were added. It was an expansion set. A good one too, as the subscriptions continued to increase. Astonishingly enough, throughout the course of the base game and this expansion, there hadn't been a single month in which the World of Warcraft had lost subscribers. Not only was Blizzard drawing in new fans, but they were also retaining the current ones. And it was also during this time when Blizzard launched their unique ad campaign where celebrities would talk about their experiences in the World of Warcraft, such as Vern Troyer, Mr. T, and William Shatner. Although Vern was the only one confirmed to have actually played the game.
I'm a mage. What's your game?
World of Warcraft, the #1 online game. Try it for free at warcraft.com.
The game progressed as normal, receiving more and more updates, and in January 2008, it broke the 10 million subscriber milestone, and even still, this would not be the peak. It was still the top MMO in the entire genre by a long shot, dwarfing all competition, which struggled to reach just 1 million subscribers. The competition did start to ramp up though. One of the first games, thought to be, quote, the WoW killer, was The Age of Conan, and it saw a release in May of 2008. The game boasted a unique reactive combat system, stunning graphics, and an adult theme. It won many awards for its showing at various gaming conventions. Upon release, it received favorable review from critics, but poor reviews from the players, citing bugs, missing zones, and a complete lack of endgame content. 1 million copies were shipped upon launch, but the subscriber number quickly declined as those flaws were uncovered. Warhammer Online, released in September of the same year, was also anticipated to be the MMO to overtake World of Warcraft. Similar in the fantasy setting with orcs, elves, and magic, it was the most comparable MMO to World of Warcraft yet, with a long-running franchise to back it up. The game saw little success, however, peaking with a mere 800,000 subscribers compared to World of Warcraft's 10 million, and dropping further to 300,000 in the months to come, before going free to play and eventually a total shutdown on December of 2013, 5 years later. This was due to an overall unpolished experience compared to the World of Warcraft, a lacking endgame, and various technical problems such as erroneously billing players for multiple subscriptions in a single day, with the highest charges reported going into the thousands. Through all of this, the World of Warcraft sailed on with great success, and on November 13th, 2008, it saw its second expansion, The Wrath of the Lich King. Following suit with the Burning Crusade, another antagonist was brought in from the Warcraft franchise, as Blizzard sought to bring more story and lore into the series. This time, it was Arthas Menethil, the Lich King, and Master of the Undead. Players launched a campaign in the continent of Northrend to challenge the Lich Lord at his own seat of power. And, just as you'd expect, more dungeons, raids, and more gameplay systems were added to satiate the now 10 million strong player base. 2.8 million copies in total were sold, breaking their own record of the fastest selling PC game of all time, set by the Burning Crusade expansion. This expansion revisited their initial design of a casual-friendly MMORPG. Combined with easier access to dungeons via a new system called the Dungeon Finder, this expansion was seen as the end of the hardcore era of World of Warcraft by many players, and many hold it in high regard as the peak of the game. A thought supported by the ever-growing subscriber numbers, with the game reaching its all-time peak of 12 million in October of 2010. Out of the released numbers, the game at this point had still never had a month where the subscribers dipped. Although reports came in less and less, starting with the Burning Crusade, there are a lot of skipped months where we very well could have seen a small dip. In the same year, China finally saw release of the Burning Crusade expansion 3 years after its original release. This is due to the amount of censorship needed to release the game. Bones and gore weren't allowed to be shown in excess, so many of the in-game assets had to be altered both in the base game and all of its expansions, thus slowing their release. They would only see a Wrath of the Lich King release months later due to the same reason. The expansion overall was a huge financial and critical success. However, although it was received well by players, it wasn't without problems outside of the game. On July 6th, towards the tail end of the expansion, Blizzard announced their plans to introduce the Real ID system on their official forums, which would change the author of all posts from the normally used in-game avatar to the real-life name tied to the poster's account. This was met with swift and heavy backlash by players and curious onlookers alike, spurring hundreds of third-party articles being published about the fiasco, addressing concerns about the privacy of the forum users. The situation quickly turned ugly as users started posting personal information of employees of Blizzard, such as phone numbers, their personal Facebook pages, and even their street addresses, and that of their friends and family. 3 days later, after an overwhelming negative response, Blizzard rescinded their plans to make the posters' names visible, although to this day, it still remains to be one of their biggest controversies. At the end of 2010, in November, the World of Warcraft saw its biggest change yet in its current 6-year run. The original launch continents, the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor, had been completely changed and reworked in preparation for the new expansion, Cataclysm. Feeling that the world that they created in 2004 had become outdated, the land, quests, and classes saw major reworks in the game's most volatile expansion yet. More content was added, just like the previous expansion, and the ease of access design approach accelerated with the introduction of the Looking for Raid system, termed LFR for short, which made the endgame activity, raiding, much more accessible to the everyday player. More dungeons, raids, and the normal expansion updates came as you would expect. The hype was huge, and players were eager for a new adventure, and in similar fashion, Blizzard once more broke the record of the fastest selling PC game of all time, with 3.3 million copies sold on release. Once the players dived into the game, however, the reception was mixed for the first time, and in March of 2011, the World of Warcraft saw its first public loss of subscribers since its release in November 2004, over 6 years ago. The MMO genre in general at this point also declined in popularity. The market had become oversaturated with hundreds and hundreds of free-to-play MMORPGs, and what used to be a rising, unique genre became almost exhausting for gamers. Because of this, and the volatility of the Cataclysm expansion itself, the subscriber numbers continued to wane for Blizzard throughout the years of 2011 and 2012, dropping to its lowest to 9 million in July of 2012, just 75% of its peak 2 years prior. Another contributing factor to this decrease was the slowdown of content. The game is updated through major content patches, a practice that's been maintained at a steady pace up until the end of the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. Inter-expansion updates at this point were fairly reasonable. The time between the last patch for the base game and the release of the Burning Crusade was just under 3 months. This increased to just under 7 months between the end of the Burning Crusade and the beginning of the Wrath of the Lich King, and even further to 9 to 10 months between the end of the Lich King to Cataclysm and Cataclysm to Pandaria. These content drops were seen as far too long by players, and slowly but surely they lost interest and found their gaming fix elsewhere. Blizzard finally saw their first increase in subscribers 2 years later with the release of the Mists of Pandaria expansion, where the war between the Horde and Alliance is reignited, and they fight over control of an unexplored world. This would be short-lived, however, as the hype died down shortly after its release, and interest continued to wane, dropping as low as 6.8 million subscribers in June of 2014, the lowest it's been since its initial rise to glory in 2006. The inter-expansion patch gap grew to 13 months, the longest yet. The new Warlords of Draenor expansion was announced, promising to go back to the roots of World of Warcraft and revisiting the same world as the Burning Crusade expansion before it became corrupted by the Burning Legion. We would go through the Dark Portal once more 7 years later and visit the world of Draenor and, once again, stop an invasion that threatens all life on Azeroth. This time, the antagonist is Grommash Hellscream, an orc warlord and the leader of the Iron Horde. The hype reached critical mass, and many anticipated the grand return of the World of Warcraft and relived their days in the Outland. The expansion saw a release on November 13th, 2014, and the game saw an explosion of new and returning players. In just 3 months, the game saw a 2.6 million subscriber increase, bringing it back to 10 million, the highest it's been since the launch of the Mists of Pandaria expansion, just in time for its 10-year anniversary. The expansion itself sold 3.3 million copies, matching their sales of the Cataclysm expansion 4 years ago. For the first time in a long time, players experienced queues to log into the game due to the servers being at full capacity. A good problem to have, you would think, but after 3 days of queues and extreme lag from the bustling launch, the patience of the players was tested. While the release of Draenor was a financial success, the expansion as a whole had little to offer. The raids added were far fewer compared to previous expansions, with just 3 throughout the entirety of it. a large amount of energy instead went into the garrison system, which served as the base of operations for the player in their campaign against the Iron Horde, something that was met with heavy criticism by the game's player base, citing that these garrisons had aspects of mobile gaming such as daily missions to launch to get rewards in both gear and gold. The garrisons themselves were also seen to be too powerful and offering too much to the player in their own separate instance, thus leaving little reason to ever leave them, taking away the biggest aspect of any MMO, and it made it seem like a single-player game at times, a problem that was exacerbated with the extreme loss of subscriptions that followed. After the initial hype died down, the game saw its sharpest decline in subscribers yet, quickly dropping from 10 million in December of 2014 to 7.1 just 3 months later in March of 2015, and further to 5.6 million in June of the same year, its lowest since December of 2005 during its rise. Blizzard chose to withhold information of their amount of subscribers from this point forward. With the little amount of content it had, the Warlords of Draenor trudged forward with its final patch, 6.2, just one of 3 major patches in the expansion if you count the pre-patch. The inter-expansion patch downtime was again staggering, clocking in at 13 months between 6.2 on June 23, 2015, and 7.0.3 on July 19, 2016. Through the success of the cash shop and the ability to buy level boosts and other cosmetic items, the Warlords of Draenor turned out better than expected financially for Blizzard, but the future of the game looked bleak. During this time, Blizzard looked for success outside of the game with their feature film, Warcraft. Directed by Duncan Jones, this movie brought the story of the Warcraft universe to the big screen and had been announced as early as 2006. It premiered in the United States on June 10, 2016, and while it grossed over $400 million worldwide, it was met with negative reviews and a disappointing domestic box office performance. Critics cited that the plot was confusing and hard to follow for those unfamiliar with the franchise. The next expansion, World of Warcraft Legion, released on August 30th, 2016. This expansion promised all of the normal things that players would come to expect out of an expansion at this point. More character levels, new gameplay features, raids, major updates to the core gameplay of each class, and, most importantly, a faster patch cycle. Including pre-orders, they had sold 3.3 million copies by the end of its release date. The actual expansion received a fair reception, without any public subscription numbers, only Blizzard knows, but overall, Legion was a nice recovery from the Warlords of Draenor. The more minor patches became more major, and their speed in general was increased, with around 11 weeks between these patches, giving players something to work on and trying to avoid those long droughts that became commonplace at this point. The problems from Draenor were addressed, and there were no garrisons, instead being replaced by the toned-down order hall system, and over the course of its 2-year run, it's had 5 raids, a respectable amount, and many new features added within the game, making it technically one of the biggest expansions yet in terms of raw content and new features. This brings us to the current day. The next expansion is the Battle for Azeroth, which seemingly reignites the war between the Alliance and the Horde once more. It's set to launch on August 14th, 2018. This video was made during the inter-expansion downtime, which will be about 6 months. Not too bad, and it's a number that they haven't met since the Burning Crusade to the Wrath of the Lich King drought. So, that's the current near 14-year history of World of Warcraft. What a long and strange trip it's been. Highs and lows for sure. Some people believe that the highs are all behind us, and what's made the game special has faded away during its 14-year run, and others still have just as much fun as they did back in November 2004. In the beginning of the video, I asked what made it special. What was it about this MMO that touched so many for the past 14 years, such that there exists several emulated servers for each expansion, and even an upcoming official release by Blizzard of the game in its original vanilla state over a decade ago? I don't think it's one simple answer, but it's what I said earlier. In comparison to the other reigning MMOs at the time, it was designed to be much easier to get into, foregoing those harsh penalties to dying, and just having an easier learning curve in general. The ease of access quickly caught on, and it was the first MMO for many people, and your first MMO is a pretty unique and memorable experience. Being used to linear single-player RPGs such as Final Fantasy or Zelda, and stepping into this massive world for the first time. And you didn't go through it alone. You made friends, joined guilds, and went through the toughest challenges together. The concept of a boss that took 40 people to kill was foreign to a lot of players. You watched your character and the game evolve before your very eyes over the course of years, not days nor weeks like the classic RPGs. It delivered a fresh and unique product in a growing genre, and left a huge impact in the MMO scene, on the gaming industry as a whole, and on the people who've played it, and it'll go down as one of the greats in gaming history. It's a story that's had ups and downs, and continues to this day. For some, it ended long ago, but for others, the drums of war thunder once again.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.
Session? Sure, but the question is, does the international addiction to an internet game represent a danger? Maybe, but there is also no indication that anything can slow the explosive growth of the intoxicating game called World of Warcraft.
And by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't.
You guys take care of us, man. Yeah, you guys really take care of us.
Calling Gamecubes all day, every day.
Incredible 16 hours a day. His mother says his personality has changed and that he's become moody and violent, and his addiction is tearing the family apart.
But our actions are going to matter more than any of these. All right, thumbs up. Ready, guys? Let's do this.
Oh my god, he just ran in. The power level where I basically get all the good loot and they get all the great experience.
world of MMORPGs, you'll scarcely find anyone who hasn't heard of, if not played, the World of Warcraft. Released in 2004, it would quickly begin to make a name for itself, garnering worldwide praise for its innovation, accessibility, and the closeness to the community by its developer, Blizzard Entertainment. Both celebrated and condemned for its addictiveness, in the span of a few short months, it would not only become the most popular of the MMORPG genre, but also set the standard for all of those that would follow in its footsteps. Many would try, and over the course of 15 years, few would gain even a fraction of the player base of the seemingly unstoppable giant. Today, though, a much different picture is painted. What was initially considered inspirational in the world of game development now leaves behind a controversial history marred with what many describe as betrayal, deception, and squandered potential, leaving many asking the question, how? A snapshot of history of a world created within a world, a microcosm of mayhem, a virtual playground for humanity to show each other their best and their worst. This is the story of Blizzard Entertainment and their iconic MMORPG, the World of Warcraft. At the dawn of the new millennium, the online world was growing rapidly. The intellect of man and the advancements of technology combined bestowed upon the world the creation of the Internet by Al Gore. News of a new Star Wars movie was spreading, the storyboard for The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring had been completed, nerd culture was about to reach critical mass, and Bill Clinton did not have sexual relations with that woman. And so entered the massively multiplayer online role-playing game, or MMORPG for short. The creation of the first MMO can be traced all the way back to the 70s, depending on your definition and standards, as they would be text-based. Though they had existed for decades, it was only near the new millennia that they would attract a sizable player base. Although varying in implementation, they all shared the central idea of an online, persistent world to be shared with players from all over the globe. A genre unique in the sense that there is no planned end, no credits rolled nor thanks for playing. Game content would be added as long as there are players playing, and the journey would only end when the player decided that it was over, a concept that was remarkably foreign to many at the time. In these early years, many would try their hand in breaking through the genre, and overall, it would contain a niche audience. Some were beginning to make a name for themselves though, such as Origin Systems' leap into the online persistent world with Ultima Online, an isometric fantasy game memorable for its PvP combat in particular. Mythic Entertainment, who would later develop Warhammer Online, took their shot with the Dark Age of Camelot, a third-person take on Arthurian lore mixed with Norse mythology and high fantasy. Star Wars would make their debut into the world of MMOs with the 2003 release, The Star Wars Galaxies, an MMO with a more heavy focus on community and sandbox gameplay. And most prolific at the time was EverQuest in 1999 by Verant Interactive and 989 Studios, decrowning the previously reigning champion, Ultima Online. Just 24 hours after launch, it would quickly become the most subscribed MMORPG at 10,000 subscribers. Yeah, really. 10,000 was the most subscribed MMORPG at the time. It would eventually peak at over 500,000 years after its launch, but as history has shown, this would yet be a fraction of the potential that was hidden within the genre, a potential that had yet to be realized. The MMO was on the rise, and the time to strike was nigh, and in the background, a beast was stirring, silently observing the strengths, the weaknesses, the successes, and the failures of the then relatively unexplored genre. Blizzard at this point already had established themselves as innovators with their Diablo, StarCraft, and Warcraft series, the latter being a real-time strategy game set in a fantasy world of orcs, elves, magic, and adventure. And having seen the success of other fantasy-based games such as EverQuest, the table was set. After halting development on an abandoned project, a small team of developers were left in limbo and were searching for inspiration on their next game. They had the IP, They had the funding, and most importantly, the timing. September 2nd, 2001. Long before Blizzard was big enough to hold their own convention, they held a panel at London's European Computer Trade Show, and it was then that the public for the first time saw the World of Warcraft. They made it clear. This was not the sequel to the popular RTS series at the time, but rather something completely different. Players would transition from controlling pre-made heroes and progressing through a campaign to creating their own heroes and making their own stories. The game would be multiplayer on a massive scale, bringing together fans of not only the Warcraft series, but of MMOs as a whole. The reaction, however, was mixed. Some waited with eager anticipation, trying to imagine their beloved series making its leap into the massively multiplayer setting, and many were upset at the abrupt change of focus, preferring Blizzard to concentrate on what was proven to work, instead of taking a gamble into unfettered territory. The idea of paying a monthly fee to continue playing was a hard pill to swallow at the time, especially by Blizzard fans who had grown accustomed to the one-time purchase models set standard by the company. Work would continue on the project, however, and the very first interview would be claimed by the Computer Gaming World magazine. By this time, EverQuest was the clear reigning champion, but the genre as a whole had one fatal flaw, and that's the learning curve. XP loss, gear loss, and even permanent character death were commonplace in nearly every game of the genre, and combined with the large time investment in playing, it cultivated a very niche and hardcore community, and the everyday casual player would quickly succumb to the intense difficulty and seek entertainment from other, more forgiving games. It was a genre with a focus on character progression, with death penalties centering around character regression and a steep learning curve to go along with it. However, this transitionary period would prove to be a key moment where players for the first time would leave single-player games that looked like this into this online sprawling world. They were incomparable to each other, and although it's funny to think now, it was an intimidating thing. The time investment was, and still is, incredibly high. You had to have a computer, you had to have a good enough graphics card to run it, you had to have internet, and you had to pay a subscription. The amount of hurdles standing between the average person and the game were already high, and combined with the unforgiving gameplay of the landmark titles representing the genre, it was just too much for the average person. But it was this person, this untapped market of new and casual players that Blizzard would set their sights on. World of Warcraft took a completely different style of approach. During a time when XP loss was the bare minimum penalty for dying, World of Warcraft made you simply run back to your corpse.
One of the great things here is that when you die, and death is an inevitability in all these games, it's really not that big of a deal. All other online RPGs make death a really bad thing because dying should be bad, right? Well, in World of Warcraft, pretty much all that happens is you sit out for a bit. You respawn back at a graveyard, and you run and get your corpse, and you respawn. You don't lose experience points, you don't lose your items or any of that stuff.
When hitting the max level took years in other games, World of Warcraft it took months for most players. And when systems were complicated and confusing, requiring external literature to understand, World of Warcraft systems were relatively straightforward, and when character stat and template choices were often permanent, World of Warcraft featured costly but reversible methods of character progression and customization. In other games, you had areas designed for large groups of high-level players, referred to as raids, but they were commonly out in the open world, which resulted in having to compete against one another for kill credit. Due to this, there was a greater sense of urgency to complete the raid in its entirety in one sitting before any other guild had the chance to catch up and bring unwanted competition. Marathon sessions of guilds setting up 24-hour shifts was a common strategy to maintain dominion of these raids, in many cases to the detriment of the health of the players. This Final Fantasy XI boss was engaged for 18 hours until players were forced to quit after they began to faint and vomit. Though this boss in particular was nerfed shortly after the incident, this was the state of the endgame for most MMOs in these early stages. However, World of Warcraft had been one of the first MMOs to standardize instanced raids, where players and guilds could create their own unique raid instances, resetting on a weekly basis. And as for the raid bosses themselves, although today seen as archaic and simplistic, at the time they were quite advanced. In a genre where raid bosses boiled down to having a unique name with a higher health pool and increased damage, World of Warcraft would add unique, and often at the time, complex mechanics that required teamwork and thought to overcome, which in turn would become one of the game's major selling points. The worlds had NPCs, but were commonly static, whereas the world of Azeroth felt more alive with dynamic NPCs going about their daily lives. Simply put, what it didn't invent, it improved. MMOs were in a constant state of almost theirs, and World of Warcraft was the first one to bridge that gap and bring it into a more mainstream audience, and it reaped the rewards because of that. The game would continue development throughout the years, with teasers being released in the form of magazine interviews and trailers, keeping the curious onlooker abreast on its direction. And after a long alpha and beta testing period, the moment of truth came on November 23rd, 2004. Its strategy of appealing to the casual gamer worked well, a little too well. Blizzard in no way was prepared for the frenzy of players eager to get into the world. Disconnects, lag, and rollbacks would persist heavily for the opening months, and still consistently through the next couple of years. Forums daily would be filled with outrage, demands for a refund, and even threats of lawsuits. The miraculous thing about it, though, is that it didn't even seem to slow its growth. The launch today is looked at as disastrous, and yet still, people came back again and again. How can a game that's playable maybe 50% of the time hold such a demand? Well, it's because it was that good. Years of development had paid off, as World of Warcraft quickly became a hit, almost immediately dwarfing all competition at the time and robbing them of their player bases. It was the vampire of the MMO industry at its release, and it would suck the life force out of every single previously mentioned staple of the genre.
But there was one unfortunate thing. The unfortunate thing was it launched right when WoW launched. Yep. So WoW brought the whole industry down, not just us. Every online game out there went down as soon as WoW went out. WoW was like a huge succubus of players went over there and drove into WoW. And it drove all our numbers.
60 levels of progression and a world of challenges awaited the eager player base, and there would be many landmark moments just waiting to be claimed. Players rushed to the max level, and the title of the world first level 60 went to a player named Zenith, a troll rogue on the Storm Reaver server on December 3rd, 2004, a little less than 2 weeks after release. By today's standards, incredibly slow, but back then, a no-life nerd, as onlookers weren't shy of expressing. On January 30th, 2005, the game would see its first raid cleared with the death of Anixia, taken down by the Guild Ruined on the Proudmoore server, and many players for the first time got to see the famed epic quality items that she hoarded. Blizzard would spend the following years perfecting their craft. As their subscriber base increased, so too did their budget, and more servers would quickly be added to support the booming player base. New patches would not only release new raid tiers, but also systems, items, and much more. And in May of the same year, the subscriber base would see its biggest surge for the next decade.
Okay guys, these eggs are giving us a lot of trouble in the past. Does anybody need anything off this guy? Or
One of the earliest videos to go viral in the World of Warcraft was created by the guild Pals for Life. The guild was strategizing on how to clear out a particularly tricky room in the upper Blackrock Spire raid.
I think it's a pretty good plan. We should be able to pull it off this time. What do you think, Abdul? Can you give me a number crunch real quick?
Yeah, give me a sec. I'm coming up with 32.10 3-3, repeating of course. Percentage of survival.
Oh, that's a lot better than we usually do.
Alright, thumbs up.
Ready, guys?
Let's do this. Leroy Jenkins!
Oh my god, he just ran in. Save him!
Oh geez, stick to the plane!
Oh Jesus, let's go. Stick to the plan.
And in the midst of the conversation, a group member, Leroy, charges in prematurely with reckless abandon, causing the death of the entire group.
I can't move, am I lagging, guys? I can't move! What the hell? I can't aim! Oh my god. The eggs keep spawning! More respawning! I don't think you can cast with that shit. Oh my god. Take it off! I got it! Take it off!
Come on, stay down.
Oh my god.
God damn it, Leroy.
The video was later revealed to be staged, but nonetheless, it caught on like wildfire, and it was shared across multiple websites and forums, making it one of the first videos for World of Warcraft to gain viral popularity. Onlookers were intrigued. Word of mouth proved to be a prolific advertising vehicle for the game. It's hard to say today just how many people watched the video, as some of the uploads have been lost. The original upload on Warcraft Movies today sits at nearly 19 million views, and the original YouTube mirror reached at least 46 million before it was taken down. And surviving mirrors today sit at a total combined count of around 24 million. Regardless, it's by far the most viewed Warcraft-related video, even to this day, over 15 years later. It was so popular, in fact, that it was later featured as a question in the trivia show Jeopardy! Just a few months later in November.
This role-playing game, out in 2004, returns to the world of Azeroth, where heroes like Leroy Jenkins do battle. And that would be the world of Warcraft.
Pathetic. The Leroy craze wasn't the only phenomenon to spawn from the game, though. September of 2005 saw the release of the Zul'Gurub raid, the final encounter of which was a boss named Hakar. He had an ability called Corrupted Blood, which dealt some damage to a player, and if they were to stand too close to another, it would spread to that person. In a contained environment, it's just another raid mechanic. That is, until one player, intentionally or otherwise, managed to create a virtual pandemic that spread across every single server. The mechanic had one fatal flaw. By getting a pet companion afflicted with the disease and then dismissing it, it would persist when the pet is summoned once more. This person did just that, but in a crowded area, and spread the affliction to every nearby player and NPC, and as long as there were living hosts, there was no escape. Entire cities became infected by the plague. Word quickly spread, and other players intentionally started spreading the disease. Ironforge, Stormwind, Orgrimmar, every major capital city was a death hub and was uninhabitable by lower-level players. The spread would continue to go on for days until Blizzard eventually hotfixed the disease, but the resulting chaos remains to this day to be one of the most memorable moments in the game's history, and has even been used in real-world research of the spread and reaction of contagious diseases. Though there are many memorable landmark moments in the game's history, some are more controversial than others. In 2006, on the ELDEN server, a player by the name of Phajin passed away suddenly from a stroke, and in memoriam of one of her favorite activities, fishing, her guild had decided to host an in-game funeral service to pay one final tribute to her. There were two problems, though. It was publicly advertised on the Realm forums, and ELDEN was a PvP server, where players of the opposite faction could freely attack one another. A guild, Serenity Now, saw the thread, and they felt that they would join in to pay tribute, but in a very different way. Having snuck through a nearby tunnel leading into the zone, an entire raid team prepared to crash the funeral. As players lined up to pay tribute to their friend, the raid quickly closed in on the location, and to make matters worse, in an effort to roleplay, many of the attendees had unequipped their armor and weapons, leaving them defenseless against the surprise onslaught. The funeral was quickly and easily dispatched. Serenity now would become infamous on their server, and the crash still stands today as one of the most controversial in-game events in its entire history. All of these moments serve a crucial role in the telling of the history of the game, and they would serve as a reminder of the reasons why it became such a success. It's due not only to its own merits, but perhaps even more drastically by the community that the world of Azeroth was comprised of. This world, however, was about to change.
How many of you have played World of Warcraft?
Due to the success of World of Warcraft, Blizzard for the first time held their own event, a convention centered solely around Blizzard games named BlizzCon. This was, and remains to be, a unique aspect of the developer to hold a personalized convention tailored to their products, a form of celebration of not only the games that they're creating, but also the already massive community that they've built. The strong focus on the community would be something that Blizzard would become known for, and it created a loyalty of sorts from the players. It felt like it was more than a game. It was a community of people sharing their combined love and passion for the worlds that they created.
You guys take care of us, man. You guys really take care of us.
Diablo, StarCraft, Warcraft. Fans from around the world would plan vacations around it. Longtime friends and guildmates would meet each other in person for the first time, and BlizzCon as a whole would become a very crucial part of Blizzard's identity from this point forward. And the very first convention, held in October of 2005, a bombshell announcement was unveiled. The world of Warcraft is about to get bigger with the release of its first expansion, the Burning Crusade.
You are not prepared.
The expansion boasted what players had come to expect from the world of Warcraft and more. They would step into the world of the Outland and progress through 10 more character levels, new zones, talents, dungeons, spells, raids, races, a profession, a new PvP system, and much more. It would add on to and improve in just about every aspect of the game. But it's still 2005, and there's a lot of game left to conquer before players began worrying about their foray into the Outland. There were dragons to kill and DKP to acquire.
Odd groups got left, even groups got right. That means 1, 3, 5, 7 left, 2, 4, 6, 8 right.
In the game, you had casual, hardcore, and everything in between. And there were some who took it even further beyond.
No reason to lose my tank, and I am blaming you, because I blame myself. I can fucking do it. Everyone can do it. Do it right. This is bullshit.
Videos of a more serious or angry nature would start to spring up at this point. Those of raid leaders chewing out members for failing and properly performing the mechanics of a boss fight.
Well,
Fighting was fair and zero.
who the fuck was that? Crush him! What the fuck? Whelps! Left side! Even side! Many whelps! Now handle it! Fuck!
The most prolific of which being Dives, the raid leader of the guild, Wipe Club. Onyxia at this point had been slain by numerous guilds, and after some unsuccessful attempts, one of the members decided to record what would later become one of the biggest meltdowns in history, the Onyxia wipe animation.
That's a fucking 50 DKP minus! What the fuck was that shit?
Much like Leroy, the animation would quickly become popular, and it highlighted the frustrating side of coordinating 40 people and clearing the challenging raids.
Don't play like you're just fucking going through the motions. You'll get your goddamn loot eventually. God damn it! Fucking bullshit!
Yeah, I know. Well, we're all gonna get attacked because we have no warlock here. Nice job, you fucking idiots!
Hey, shut the fuck up! You stupid fuck! Stop!
These videos would paint players in a much less flattering light, as many people would become so obsessed that they would shirk real-life responsibilities and fall out of contact with friends, quit work or school, and in the most extreme cases cause harm to themselves or others. In Korea of June of 2005, the 4-month-old child of a couple would suffocate when left unsupervised for several hours as the parents were playing World of Warcraft in an internet cafe. The phrase World of Warcrack was coined, shedding light on the dark side of video game addiction, particularly that of MMOs and the consequences of obsession, something that the media was not shy of reporting, as World of Warcraft, due to its popularity, would find itself at the center of this war against video game addiction.
Computer games, he's playing them an incredible 16 hours a day. His mother says his personality has changed and that he's become moody and violent, and his addiction is tearing the family apart.
To many, it was more than a game. It was a virtual life with the graphical interface. It attracted people from all walks of life and blended them together in the chaos of this online world. News of the Burning Crusade remained to be scarce, as it was still under NDA in the Friends and Family Alpha. A blog post teasing new features would be shared scarcely, but otherwise, it was still largely a mystery outside of what was shared at the 2005 BlizzCon. The excitement was palpable, and players from all over the world couldn't wait to get into the Outland. The beta test for the expansion started not too long after, as players got to discover and explore its features, and shortly after, World of Warcraft would become the focus of the cartoon series South Park with their Make Love Not Warcraft episode. The episode detailed the boys' fight against a hacker antagonist and their struggle with video game addiction.
Oh, that's a big boy, isn't he?
Though on release it was an instant success, many years later, series co-creator Trey Parker detailed his worries with the episode, revealing that he even tried to get it pulled as he feared that it simply wasn't funny. But as history has shown, the episode would become an instant success, and despite the fact that the series at this point now has over 300 episodes, it remains to be one of their most popular to this day.
Looks like you're about to get pwned.
January 16th finally came, and it marked the beginning of a new era, the official end of vanilla World of Warcraft. People lined up outside of stores and tents in the freezing cold, launch parties were held, and the community was stronger than ever and pulled together with their one shared trait, their fear of women, their collective love for the game. At this point, it had amassed roughly 8 million subscribers by the expansion's release, never once reporting a loss, and holding on to the lion's share of the market. In the background stirred some serious competition, however. Mythic Entertainment, who developed the Dark Age of Camelot, sought to compete against Blizzard with an MMORPG adaptation of the renowned Warhammer series. Due to its similar fantasy setting, holding orcs, magic, elves, and wizards, many thought it to be the direct competitor to World of Warcraft, and deemed it to be one of the first of many would-be WoW killers during the time. Another such game was The Age of Conan, the Hyborian Adventures, developed by Funcom, who is mostly known in the MMO community for Anarchy Online in 2001. Its selling points would be impeccable graphics at the time, and a new and fresh combat system in a dark and visceral world, featuring the fatality mechanic, where players could execute each other in brutal fashion, often described as the Mortal Kombat of MMORPGs. And The Lord of the Rings Online by Turbine was also in development, an MMO of one of the most celebrated franchises in nerd culture history, certainly posed as a serious threat to Blizzard at the time. Though these contenders would be far off from release, the competition was beginning to get fierce, and to stave them off, the Burning Crusade had to be as exceptional as its predecessor. Months and months of doomsaying was put to the test. Did the Burning Crusade kill the World of Warcraft? Of course, the answer is no. The expansion was a major success, and the subscription base rose even more rapidly as players explored the dangerous reaches of the Outland. The classes evolved, and the gap between them was lessened, while still retaining the features that made them special. The raids were more challenging, the bosses more complex, and offering more to conquer to the ever-growing subscriber base. And the raiding scene itself proved to be even more difficult for players than what they had encountered in the base game, with many lists today naming a plethora of Burning Crusade bosses as the hardest in the game's history, even over 14 years later. with some of them going unkilled by 99% of the player base until Blizzard intervened themselves to make them easier. The expansion today is remembered for having an extensive process for gaining entry to the raids called Attunement. A large series of story-based quests served as an alternate form of character progression, and players would rarely find themselves with nothing to do. The PvP system had evolved to be more competitive with the new Arena mode, where players create custom teams and battle in small-scale matches to the death, setting the stage for future competitive events in Blizzard's attempt to gain a foothold into the growing esports scene. The Alliance for the first time got to experience a new class to them, the Shaman, and for the Horde, the Paladin, both with 2 new races added to the game, the Draenei and the Blood Elf. 5-man dungeons rose back to the forefront with the advent of the more challenging heroic difficulty. The expansion was packed with features and upgrades in its design, and stands as one of Blizzard's most critically acclaimed releases even to this day. The Lord of the Rings also saw its release in 2007 to serve as competition for World of Warcraft, and although receiving favorable reviews at the time, it couldn't compare to the size and scope of WoW, selling under 200,000 copies in the first months of release, and growing shortly thereafter. The game does still run today, supported by a niche community, and is hovering around 40,000 active players at the time of this video. So, the Burning Crusade pressed on, undaunted, and in the following BlizzCon in August, the next expansion, The Wrath of the Lich King, was announced. Players were teased of the land of Northrend, where they had once visited in the events of Warcraft 3. It's here where they would face off against Arthas Menethil as
Alright, so let's go turn these quests in, get a level. That'll be a nice stream. Got Wailing Caverns, definitely further than our other Shaman Tank. 2 levels, will be 23 here.
And due to the success of the Burning Crusade, there was little question.
And we got gear upgrades, like we got a blue shield, it has no stem, but I mean, stronger, and we got leggings of the Fangs, so fuck, we take those.
Absolutely dwarfing any and all competition. The up-and-coming contender, The Age of Conan, saw its release in May of 2008 and received generally positive reviews by the media, and had sold over 1 million copies by the end of its release month, though ultimately, the game had failed to retain this impressive surge of subscribers. Although reviewers worldwide had praised the game, the player base condemned it as being unfinished and rushed, as subscriptions quickly declined, and just 1 year later, Funcom would perform a fatality on 31 out of its 42 servers. Much like The Lord of the Rings Online, the game still holds a dedicated yet niche following, by and large falling short of being the WoW killer that many predicted that it would be. In July, in a bombshell announcement at the height of the game's popularity, the power of the dark side could be resisted no longer, as Blizzard's parent company, Vivendi, announced a merger with Activision. Already having gained a reputation for excessive monetization and driving franchises and developers to an early grave, many were dismayed at the news, fearing that the same would become true for their beloved franchises, including the World of Warcraft. Along with EA, they would gain the reputation of exploiting the player base to the fullest extent, and spearheads today one of the largest focus on cash shops and pay-to-win game design. And just 1 year later, in September of 2009, Activision Blizzard would release the paid faction change service, and 1 month after that, the paid race change service, along with in-game collectible pets. These services were seen by many as an affront on the integrity of the game, and although not terribly impactful by themselves, it was believed that they would serve as a gateway for more damaging paid services to be introduced later. In September of 2008, the release date for the Wrath of the Lich King expansion became set in stone for November of the same year. Just as it was back in 2006, the clock began ticking for players to finish their activities in the Burning Crusade before the content was made to be irrelevant, and due to the difficulty of the raiding scene in general, they had their hands full. There was quite a long drought between the final patch of the Burning Crusade and the launch of Wrath, nearly 8 months, but players didn't seem to mind due to the success and lingering challenge that the expansion had to offer. Those who thought otherwise, though, sought to fill in this void with the release of the highly anticipated Warhammer Online, which saw its release in September. But was it enough to succeed where The Lord of the Rings Online and Age of Conan failed? The game saw similar numbers to the Age of Conan, selling 1.2 million copies at launch and starting off with a solid subscriber base of 800,000 players. But similar to Funcom's debacle, it simply wasn't ready. Performance issues overshadowed what could have been a great experience, and players that have grown accustomed to World of Warcraft's finely tuned and polished combat system immediately noticed a lack of fluidity with its gameplay. Additionally, the game would suffer from major scandals, such as erroneously charging subscribers for years of game time in a single day, with some racking up charges and overdraft fees into the thousands. Similar to the Age of Conan, Warhammer failed to retain this early surge of players, the servers were shut down, and the subscriber base dropped even lower than that of their 2001 MMO, The Dark Age of Camelot. The game officially shut down in 2013, but many deemed it to be truly dead just 1 year after its release. Shortly after, the Wrath of the Lich King expansion saw its release, and Blizzard would once more break sales records. Players charged into Northrend with new zones to explore, dungeons and raids to conquer, and a new class to discover. The Death Knight was what everyone expected and more. A lot more. Way too much, in fact, as many saw them to be far too powerful on release. They would later be tuned down in upcoming patches. Replayability was amplified as the achievement system was implemented, and players could collect points, titles, mounts, and more through this new feature aimed towards completionists. It would receive positive reviews of its many new features and improvements, and the subscriptions continued their upward trend, eventually peaking at 12 million. Just as with the Burning Crusade, it seemed to be unstoppable, though it would be where the first sign of weakness showed. Through the numbers that have been made public, there wasn't a single moment where Wrath had lost subscriptions between reports, but it was also the first expansion where they had stopped gaining subscribers, as they hovered around 11 to 12 million throughout the course of the expansion, and as shown, it wasn't due to any of these would-be WoW killers. In August of the same year, the raiding scene expanded in a big way, as the third raid tier for the expansion, The Trial of the Crusader, would release with the heroic difficulty setting. Previously, if players saw an extra challenge with the encounters, they could impose boss-specific
actually, let's just call it a stream here, basically. I'm just going to be, while we're recording, I'm just going to be, doing, a run to, like, the quest turn-ins, basically. So, we'll get, like, a level and everything. Nothing fancy here. Like, the whole part of this stream was the Wailing Cavern run as Shaman Tank, so we got that done. Thank you guys for watching. I will be back maybe tomorrow.